We're
live.
live. We did it. Yay.
Yay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I feel like, right now with everything happening in the world, like your book could have not come at a better time. Between, we're on the verge of World War III. There's eye raids all over LA. Like it feels like such an overwhelming time to be a parent. And your book, Hello Cruel World, honestly has given me peace in the midst of this chaos. I read it in 2 days. So, kudos, because I think you definitely wrote this like with parents in mind in a way that it would be like easy to read and also like, things that we can just learn and apply right away. So thank you. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for reading it, and thank you for reaching out. And I mean, yeah, it's a crazy time in general, and to be a parent is
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, we don't even know how to manage it ourselves. So it's just like, I mean, at some point, I mean, I remember in January we had the fires and we had to like relocate, like, for 6 weeks. And is how do you keep calm and how do you communicate? Because clearly a lot of things are happening.
Mhm.
So, and you don't want to just trauma dump on them at the same time, but it's also impossible to pretend like everything is going great. How much do you think it's like our own anxieties? And like how much do you think it's like a reality? Because I feel like you've done a lot of research on this at this point.
You mean like how terrified we feel, how out of control we feel, like how much of it is
Yeah.
anxiety versus reality? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
really good question. I think it's certainly a combination. I mean, there's a lot of rapid change happening in the world right now. There's a lot of bad stuff happening. So like that's real.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been in, past decades and generations and it's not like this is the first time people have gone through hard times. So I do think also there is a ton of parent anxiety that I really feel like is not our fault. We are being told to be anxious. Like we are being given so much fear-based messaging about parenting, about raising kids, about like what our kids' futures are going to look like. I mean, social media, I don't know. I follow a lot of parenting influencers on Instagram, and like
Yeah.
whenever I scroll through, I have like a special like fake Instagram account that follows just like all the ones that like kind of give me hives because I can't follow them from my real ones. And when I go through, I'm like, oh my God, these are kind of designed to make me feel like a terrible parent. Like they are really fear inducing, they're really anxiety inducing. A lot of like books make parents feel terrified right now. So um I think it's a combination of like, yeah, the world is really hard right now, and it's really hard to know like how to parent and how to manage our own emotions while we're taking care of our kids, and then also we're being fed all these messages that are telling us that like we should be scared because you can really mess up your kids unless you parent them the exact right way, and if you have the wrong tone of voice, like everything is terrible and your kids are going to grow up to murder somebody. I'm thinking like the show Adolescence, like that's a terrifying show.
Terrifying.
Oh my God, it was so scary. And I think so many parents saw that and they were like, oh my God, is my teen son going to commit murder because he's on social media? So, like, there's a lot that is making us
Yeah.
feel scared. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
weird because, I mean, in your book, you say that we shouldn't be shielding the kids away from these realities. But I feel like as parents, it's hard to kind of like find a middle ground of like how much do you say. Have you found that there's like, any like clues that are like probably like, how do you even relate this information to a child?
Yeah. Um, I think it does depend on your kid. Obviously, like if you have a 3-year-old versus a 12-year-old, you're going to have very different conversations and want
Yeah.
to share different levels of information. And it also depends on like the temperament of your kid. You have a kid who's like going to jump immediately to anxiety and panic when you say something, or do you have a kid who's like, oh, okay, but like we're okay, right? So it kind of depends on who your kid is. But I do think there is this instinct in us, and it's very well meaning to protect our kids from anything scary, anything that might, make them uncomfortable. And we do that in a lot of ways. And one way is like by not talking to them about things that are happening in the world. And I think the biggest risk there is that they might hear about what's going on from someone else, from social media, from their friends, from, the radio. And what they're hearing might not be accurate. What they're hearing might be real, just they might interpret it in a way that's not accurate. And so what we are often doing if we don't talk to our kids about what's going on in the world is we're just ensuring that they get that information from somewhere else that isn't us. And who knows if we can trust that source. So I think sometimes a good way to find out if there's something that's big that's happening. You can also just like say, "Hey, have you heard anything about blah 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 happening in the world right now?" To see like, have they heard about it? Is it freaking them out? And if not, you can decide like how much you want to tell them, or you could be like, "Well, if you ever want to know that about that, it's just a thing happening. Like, let me know." Like you can do it. You can kind of broach a conversation without having to get into everything too, but just
Mhm.
to like let your kids know that you're there if they hear anything weird, if they have any questions, if they're hearing things from their friends, like they should, feel free to come to you.
Are there any phrases that you have found that are like kind of like helpful on like how to like bring out these topics, like to validate? Because I feel like it's important to validate their fear
Mhm.
because they are scared, and you just you have to acknowledge that, but at the same time, like you want to give them some power, like in a way,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, I think whatever feeling they're having, even if we think it's not like, appropriate to the situation, I think it's really helpful to just to let them know that you hear them, that you're like, okay, you're feeling scared. I see that you're feeling scared. That's hard. I'm sorry you're scared. To really validate and not to dismiss, not to say like, well, don't be scared. It's not a big deal, or you don't need to worry about. So validate the feelings, and then whatever it is you're talking about, try to yourself, if you can, like stay calm, try, which is like the hardest thing ever. Um, yeah,
You're like, I'm
you
not
know,
freaking out. I'm not freaking out. It's totally
I'm
fine. Everything's
totally
totally fine.
fine.
Totally
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that's kind of an impossible task right
Just
now,
send
but
it. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Everything is gonna be great. I'm having a great time. We're
it's
packing the
wonderful.
house.
Everything's
We're
peachy.
moving.
Oh God. But yeah, to the degree that you can, take some deep breaths. Tell them whatever you want to tell them, like as calmly and straightforwardly as possible. And then the last step, which you just alluded to, is like saying something that can give them a sense of hope and aid. So if it's something terrible that's happening in the world that you want to like change and fight against, then you could say, okay, let's brainstorm. Like, what could we do to make a difference here? Maybe it's like calling your representatives together. Maybe it's going to a protest. Maybe it's giving money, but like have have a conversation about the concrete steps you can take to, to participate in this change and to participate in activism, because that is what gives kids this sense of like, okay, yes, I'm scared, but now I have more information. I mean, the other important thing is to really try to make them feel safe. Like it is really important for kids to feel safe, even if we're totally not sure how safe they are, but to say,
Yeah.
I'm going to protect you. I'm going to keep you safe. Like we're going to be okay. And then give them, and that could be the sense of safety they need. And then if there is something you can say that can give them agency and hope, like let's think about what we can do together. That is really, really helpful as well.
One of the things that I found very interesting in your book was the role of play and the connection between play and resilience. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So it's really interesting with my book. Each chapter is like a different skill, a different characteristic, just for anybody who doesn't know much about it. And I talk about the science of like what it is, why it's important, how it develops, what parents and caregivers can do to foster it. And as I was reporting, and they're all different skills. There's like resilience and empathy and media literacy and all sorts of things, self compassion. What I found was that play, like free independent play, came up so many times as I was researching these different skills as like a profound and important way to build different skills. And so play builds social skills, it builds empathy, and yes, it builds resilience. It helps also kids learn like to develop this like repertoire of leisure activities that they like. I have a chapter on like helping kids develop a balance between, work and play, or work and leisure. But anyway, point being, play is hugely helpful for so many things. And resilience is one of them. So, when kids are playing, they're doing so many things. They're playing with friends. They're going to encounter like conflicts. They're going to have to problem solve. Like, how are we going to make this look like a castle? How are we going to create this castle? Whatever it is. Um, they have to figure out like how to communicate when there's like confusion and in the communication. They have to push past it. They also have to sometimes, you have to like as a kid be willing to let somebody else take a turn or have an idea, or the other kid's going to be like, you're bossing me around, I don't want to be involved. And so play also helps develop like impulse control and patience and those kinds of things. And all of these skills are part of resilience. Including like frustration. I mean, when kids play together, sometimes you get frustrated. You're like, I didn't want the castle to look like that. I didn't, I whatever. And you get frustrated and you get, uncomfortable. And if you want to keep playing, though, you've got to like figure out how to get through that. And so play is like this beautiful constellation of experiences that kids are exposed to that help to build all sorts of skills, including resilience. Because resilience is like so much of it is having the emotional coping skills to be able to deal with whatever emotion you're feeling. Like it's like you have frustration and you're experiencing the frustration, you recognize it, and then you have like a certain way of coping with that frustration. And the more you are exposed to frustration, the more you practice those coping skills that help you deal with frustration, and then the more resilient you get. So it's like it's all about practice. It's all about like letting our kids have these tough experiences, and play is a really great way to expose them to it. So,
But you also make a difference between free play and organized play, right? I feel like as a
yeah.
society as well, we're kind of like so scared to like mess up um that we just want to control as much as we can, and it's very hard as a parent because you just really trying hard not to. They're gonna go to like either shrink for some reason, therapy, or for some reason or other, but like you really want to like try very hard not to. So we're like making all these play dates and like making all these control play environments, thinking that we're doing good for our child, when maybe this type of play is not necessarily what's best for our child. Can you make like the difference between both like free play and then organized play for everyone that maybe is listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So organized play, I think of as like, playing soccer, playing the saxophone, like playing some kind of, game with like rules that are set by adults that is overseen by adults. And there's nothing wrong with soccer and,
Yeah.
organized play is great. It's just not enough. It's also important for kids to have free play, which is like they make up the rules. They do what they want. They don't have an adult telling them like how they should do it, what they should, how they should play. Organized play, the thing is it really just it because the adults are kind of there taking charge, telling kids what to do. They're not having that same sense of like independence um and they're not facing the same complexities in a way. I mean, there's certainly like, if you lose a soccer game as a kid, like that's hard. You're still facing frustration.
Yeah.
So you do get exposed to these resilience building opportunities through organized play. But free play is like just kind of opens things up more and kids are exposed to even more skill building opportunities. I think the other thing that's important to mention about organized play is that sometimes I think we as parents, when we enroll our kids in these teams,
Mhm.
we may also like put a lot of pressure on them to excel and to succeed and to, be scoring the goals or making the shots or whatever. And that pressure, if kids feel a lot of pressure from parents that to excel and to achieve and to get good grades and all of these things, that pressure can be really risky. It can be really harmful for kids over the long term because kids sometimes interpret that pressure as mom and dad only love me when I do what they want me to do, when I achieve, when I excel. And they start to think of our love for them as being contingent on what they're doing. And that is not good for their self esteem. And it's also, it just, we know that kids who have a lot of academic and extracurricular pressure put on them, they become more anxious. They are more likely to be depressed. They're more likely as teens to have substance use problems. So there's just like all sorts of ways in which if we're enrolling kids in these organized activities with also an expectation of, excellence all the time, then we can sometimes set them up for a mental health problem. So that's just like another aside with organized play. Free play is like you go, you do what you want. Mom's gonna stay inside and read. You go outside and play, and like we're not there to like insert ourselves and to put pressure on our kids and to make them feel like they're doing things wrong. It's just like they take it wherever they want to, and it's really beautiful.
It's very interesting because I feel that maybe past generations didn't have this as much, because I feel like in different ways kids had more freedom to also go outside and play. And now, because obviously we are so anxious as well, I'm like a very anxious Italian Peruvian mom over here. Like it's hard to even like let them like room free and have any agency, even when we're in a supermarket, right? It's just like go get the bread. Like clearly my 3-year-old can go and get the bread, but I'm just so scared of someone maybe coming and kidnapping him that maybe I don't do that. And it's so hard to like kind of like navigate that line, you know what I mean? To just, like, be like, "Yeah," because it's good because he feels so confident and so happy when, like, he's able to kinda, like, do that, and I would love, to let him, like, go free and play and maybe walk to the park and kinda have some agency in his own right. I mean, he's 3, so maybe a little bit older. Um, when he's 5 or 6, it can but I think that we're also living in a world where, for us, it's hard, and we forgot how beneficial it can be for our kids because our parents used to go and be able to go to the park by themselves. Like it was not a big deal. And,
Yeah.
it was and then it really makes them feel so useful and so, like, cared for in a way, the fact that we allow for them to, like, go and be free and, like, have agency of their own bodies, which is even when I let my 3-year-old, like, do little things around the house, he already kinda, like, sees that, and I feel like I'm having to, like, work really hard and be like, "Yeah, go play with your friends, do that, and I'll stay in the other room and not control anything, I'll be fine, fine."
I know. No, it is hard. It is hard. And but we do know that for kids, like they really appreciate when we give them, the independence and we give them the opportunities to try things on their own. Like there's one study that is kind of the flip side of this, but it found that kids whose parents help them a lot, especially like with homework, when they're asked like, how does that make you feel? What they say largely is, this makes me feel like my parents think I'm incompetent. And so like when we don't give them the opportunities to do things on their own, to go to the other aisle in the grocery store, to play outside on their own, they sometimes interpret that as like mom and dad just don't think I can do anything. And they start to internalize that, like they don't think I'm competent. And so it is really, really important to give them those opportunities in a way that like feels safe to us, obviously. And, it's going to look
It's also
different for every
It's
family.
also hard, like, I don't know if that happened to you when your kids were little. Like, my son is 3, he's learning how to, like, put the little seat belt on the car seat, and it takes so long. It takes so long. And I'm like, "It's fine. He's gonna learn. He's gonna learn. He's gonna learn." And I'm like, "But I really need to go because I have to go to a meeting, and I can't be late for my meeting, but this is now taking 10 minutes, and I'm gonna give him agency. I really wanna give him agency, but at the same time, like,
Yes,
I
I
really need to
know.
get to my meeting." You know what I mean? It's like
Right. We just don't have time to let them do it themselves. No, I know. I've been there many times myself. And so I guess like it's like, well, can you create opportunity like can
yeah,
maybe not every day. Maybe when not on the way
the
to work when you're
weekends,
dropping them
yeah.
at daycare. Like the weekends, right? Like when you have a little extra time, like, okay, we'll leave 5 minutes earlier for this play date so you can like get strapped in if you have that 5 minutes of time. Like if it's a Saturday and you have nothing going on. Not that any of us ever have nothing going on, but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
so it doesn't have to be every time, and it can't be every time because, yeah, like things with kids, I
it's just
mean,
not
having them
realistic.
tie their own shoelaces, it's like, oh my God, like this takes 20 minutes. Yeah. So it's when you can.
Another I had, I had an interesting upbringing and, like, very different change of subject, but, like, you bring up because you were bringing up the pressure and then obviously substance abuse, in children, and I grew up I was kind of, like, analyzing how I grew up and kinda like what you talked about in the book, and since I was very, very little, like, I remember my mom was showing me pictures of an apple being rotten and eaten by a worm and telling me, "This is what happens to your brain when you do drugs." Um, Obviously, this was coming from, like, her own traumas because she had brothers that had been addicts, and she just kinda wanted to, like, make sure that I didn't go down that path. What have you found through the research that is a good way to talk to kids about, like, alcohol and drugs, and, like, when do you even start bringing that up, or should you even bring that up?
Hmm. Yeah, you should definitely bring it up.
Mm.
And from, I mean, and not just like
As a
one.
baby like me, like, with an apple, or is it, like, a little bit later?
So I would say with, yeah, with like kids in preschool, you can just start by talking about like healthy habits. Like here's why we brush our teeth. Here's why, we I don't know, whatever it is. Here's why we brush our hair. Here's why we wash our face or wash our body. And we do this like to keep our bodies healthy because it's good for our bodies. And here's, why whatever it is we do, like to make our brain smarter, and to, here's why we learn the alphabet, whatever you want to say. But like you kind of try to connect things that you do and the habits that you have at home to like what they're doing that's good for your brain, your body, etc. And that's a good starting point. Is just like laying the foundation for like there are such things as like healthy habits for your body. And then when kids are older, and I mean, I certainly started talking about it in early elementary school. Talking about, yeah, like drugs and alcohol, and what I the context, it really depends on like why you're talking about it. But I've made the point that alcohol, if you have it before your brain is fully developed, it can really hurt your brain. And
Mhm.
so, alcohol is something that I, as a grown up, sometimes have. They know I have a glass of wine in the evenings on the weekend sometimes, and it's we know that now that it's not great for adult brains either, but whatever. Um, Great. One more thing to add to the list of things that are happening in the world. But like we know that having a drink, even just a little bit, like having alcohol when you're growing up, is really bad for your brain and it can hurt it. And so like having those kinds of conversations. What experts told me too is like it's really helpful with tweens and teens to talk about more immediate consequences and effects of like drinking or doing drugs. So not like, here's what the ads that were like, here's what your lungs will look like when you're 60 if you've smoked
Yeah.
your whole life. And
Yep.
you look at that and you're like, as a 10-year or 12, 15-year-old, you're like, I'm going to be 60. I don't care what happens to my lungs when I'm
I'll be dead by
60.
60. Yeah,
I'll be
we don't
dead. I
even yeah.
really don't like whatever. I do not care what happens when I'm 60. And so it's really, those are not effective. And so what experts say is like, talk about, okay, well, if you got caught drinking, what do you think would happen with the soccer team you're on? Do you think you would get kicked off? Do you think you would not be able to play anymore? What would happen? What would your teachers do? How would you be, et cetera, et cetera? Like have it be about like immediate consequences, and then help them come up with refusal skills and scripts. Like, what would you say if somebody offered you? So I have an 8th grade boy, and he has not, to my knowledge, and he's pretty open with me, been offered alcohol yet. But every time, like he went to a field trip a few weeks ago, and I was like, you know what? Like it is possible that someone's going to try to sneak in alcohol and offer you some. And he was like, what? Like, no, no, that wouldn't happen. Like, that's crazy. Like maybe in 10th grade, mom. And I was like, no, but who knows? And like, what do you think you could say? Like, how could you say no in a way that would make you feel comfortable? And like, we went through that. And so bringing it up when you have the opportunity, when you're like, oh, maybe it could happen at this particular evening out, like bring it up again. Just the more you talk about it, the better it is. And I think one final thing I want to say, sorry, I feel like I'm totally rambling, but
No.
you can set expectations. Like, I really don't want you to drink until you're 21 because we know what alcohol does to a growing brain. You can set that expectation, but you can also say, but, I know everybody makes mistakes. And if you are ever in a situation in which you're drinking, then you can always call me and I will come get you. And, like, I want you to be safe. That's the most important thing. Like, I really hope you don't get in a
Yeah.
situation where you were drinking, but if you do, I will understand. I will come get you, and like, you know, we will go from there. So you can both like have the expectation and set that, and then also like say,
I'll still
but
be there.
I will
Yeah.
still be there, and I still hope that you call me because I want to help you and I love you and I want you to be safe, and I'll love you no matter what. That is also an important message.
Should we be throwing parties at our homes? I mean, I know America has very strict rules about this. So, but like growing up,
Yeah.
my mom used to. I mean, in Peru is a lot. I'm from Peru, and it's a little bit more flex. And we used to have parties, and the whole rule was like, drink at home because I rather kind of like see what you're doing than you go out there and do it there. What does the research actually say regarding doing that?
Yeah. So, um, I don't know if there's specific research on throwing parties for your kids, but what we
But like the
do
alcohol
know,
part. Yeah.
yeah, but we do know that when kids are offered alcohol at home or they're given sips at a young age, like there's this idea that, okay, if we let kids like try alcohol when they're teenagers, they'll probably develop a healthier relationship with it because it won't be this forbidden fruit. Like there's this idea that in Europe, kids have a better relationship with alcohol because they do drink earlier and more regularly in their teen years. And the research completely refutes that. It shows that, the earlier a kid has a sip of alcohol, the more likely they are to develop problems in teenage years and young adulthood. And, if you as a parent offer your child a drink at home, then that does actually increase the chance that they're going to develop problems with alcohol. So the researchers I talked to were all like, they were uniformly like, please don't
Don't.
think that it will help if you give your kids alcohol or if you condone it or if you provide it like to at a party. Like, we do not recommend that. We recommend sticking to the expectation of like, I really would like you to wait until you're 21 because your brain is still growing and it will hurt your brain.
How about
It's hard to
parents
do.
that, like, maybe smoke weed? Um, I mean, I live in
Yeah.
California, so it's, like, very, I have a lot of I don't smoke, but I have a lot of friends that do, and their kids kinda see them smoking. Does that have any impact on the kids? Like, should they be doing that or trying to avoid that?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So again, there's not that much research on this, but we do know that when parents are smoking a lot of pot in the house, and kids tend to be more likely to smoke as well. What I am a fan of again is like separating out like, here's what we know about how marijuana affects the adult brain versus here's what we know about how it affects the teenage or kid brain, right? And so you can say, look, you know, we know we still need more research on cannabis, but we know there's a lot of research now that's suggesting that the kids, teens who smoke pot, it hurts their brain. Like it can have lasting consequences on the brain. So it's best if you wait. So again, it's not like don't ever do this, but it's
Yeah.
like here's what we know about why it's not great for you right now, and please, we hope that you'll wait. And I was going to say something else, but I can't remember now. But yeah, this it's a similar message with pills. I would say make it even a stronger case. Like fentanyl is terrifying, and you have a little bit of fentanyl in a pill, and it could be Ritalin. I mean, kids who get like Ritalin and Xanax and anything else from anywhere that's not a pharmacy directly, with a prescription from a doctor, it can be fentanyl, and it could kill them. Just one pill. So I have said to my kids, you could get a pill from a friend, and you could take it and you could die within 3 minutes. And so
Yeah.
please never, ever, ever take a pill that someone has given you, even if it's a good friend, even if you trust your friend, if you don't, if it did not come from a prescription bottle that you have been, that have gotten from a doctor, please do not take it. You could die. And like that sounds terrifying, and it is,
Yeah,
but it is true.
but it
It's not
is.
an exaggeration. Yeah.
It's terrifying for us. I feel so old with the whole conversation about pills because growing up, I don't know if ADHD was not treated in South America or I never even heard about it, but no kid was taking pills for
Yeah.
anything, really. So I moved here and then I'm like starting to like hear about all this like kids, especially in high school, taking all these pills. And now obviously, the risk is a lot higher, like you're saying, because you literally would die between minutes and there's not even time to get to a hospital to even get treated. Whether with an overdose, so at least there will be a little bit more time to try to pump it up. But it's petrifying that, like, there's so many kids just taking pills to that extent where they would even that where you even have to have that conversation of, like, "Don't take pills from your friends." You know what I mean?
I know. I know. No, it's terrifying that we have to have this
So
conversation.
scary.
There are so many kids on taking pills for various reasons. And I mean, if they're getting them from a doctor, that's one thing, but for to
Just
treat
for
a
them.
condition, but for recreational stuff, it's often from a dealer that will be giving you fentanyl, and
Yep,
it's
yep.
heartbreaking. Yeah.
Speaking well, I feel like that kinda, like, transitions into the topic of friends.
Mm.
With because I feel like, I mean, there's this idea of like, tell me who your friends are, and like, I will tell you who you are. And obviously, friendships feel so intense, and the dynamics around friendships feel so intense when you're young. Can you talk a little bit about why these dynamics feel so intense, especially for women when you're young?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I have a daughter who's 10, and there has been some drama. But not it's things have calmed down. Yeah, I mean, so I wrote a lot about like how the ways in which girls, and I'm overgeneralizing of course, but like there are on average gender differences in how kids are socialized in relationships, and both boys and girls are socialized in ways that are not healthy um,
Yeah.
within relationships. And so with girls, what the research finds is that especially like as girls become tweens and teens, they have been socialized to sacrifice themselves and their own needs and wants for their relationships, for their friends. And so there becomes this disconnect between like almost like girls start to lose touch with who they are. They start to not even know what they want. And I mean, I don't know about you, but like I mean, I find I don't sometimes even know. People will be like, "What soup do you want?" And I'm just like, "I have no idea." And I honestly think that women sometimes are indecisive because we have been socialized for so long to put other people's preferences before ours that we just don't even know what we like and want anymore. And that is really harmful, both for girls themselves, but it also it affects relationships. It then leads to like feelings of resentment if you're constantly doing stuff and sacrificing your own needs for your friends. And then you have also the piece of anger and how girls are socialized to not show anger and to suppress it and to hide it because it's not a feminine
Right.
emotion. And so when we do that, because anger is actually an incredibly important feeling because it tells us when things are not right, when there's injustices, when we're not being treated well. It's an incredibly useful emotion. It's a political emotion. And so when girls start suppressing and suppressing and suppressing their anger, then when they do feel anger, it comes out sideways. Elise Linden wrote this in her book on our best behavior. And she said, like, girls are socialized to show their anger sideways. It comes out sideways. And that's just like in the passive aggressive, like mean girls sort of behavior that you sometimes see. And so I think it's really important as a parent to both um, empower your girls. Like if they have an opinion, if they have anger, like let them have that anger and do not tell them to calm down. Like let them be angry and celebrate that anger. And, the other day I was actually really upset about something and I was like, I'm so angry and like, I don't know what to do about it. And my mom and my daughter was like, Mom, remember that anger is good. Anger is an important emotion. And I
Oh,
was like, yeah,
it's so cute.
I know. I'm like writing this book. I feel like I've like hit this nail on the head so many times with her. Like, or I'm just like over, whatever the cliche is
Yeah.
that I'm not getting. Um, anyway, so yeah, we need to like help them recognize their wants and needs, listen to those wants and needs. And so when our daughters are like, no, it's okay, I'll just do this. Like sometimes my daughter does that with her brother and she's like, you can have it your way. And I will sometimes say, well, wait a minute, you always let him have it his way. Like, how about you listen to yourself and not not
Yeah.
always let him have it his way. And then and when they do get angry, like help them feel like it's an okay emotion to have and then talk about ways that they can express it that's healthy, which is not like passive aggressively, but like directly, like communicating your feelings to people that you're angry at in a calm way, that in a way that like is respectful to the other person, but also is honest and authentic.
It's so interesting because I didn't put two and two together until I read that. And I remember that was one of the sentences that really like struck a chord with me because I didn't realize how many times when I was a teenager, I was putting the group and the sense of belonging above myself. And I really I felt like I needed to like shrink so I could belong, right? And obviously that translates like later in life and hopefully we evolve and we, mature and it gets a little bit better. Now they're more conscious about it. But it really is such an important topic. And I feel like the way that boys do it, it's so and I have 2 little boys. I know nothing about boys. So I was terrified when I was having boys because I grew up in an all girl school. There were no boys around. So it was just very passive aggressive. You shrink to belong. And that was kind of like how you survived in this dynamic. But men seem to be quite the opposite.
Yeah, it's very different.
Um,
Yeah, masculinity is a very
well, we
different.
we try to think we're above like genders, and it's just like, oh, it's 2025. Genders don't really matter. It's fine. Everyone is the same. And then you have kids, and you're like, well, as much as I would like this to be true, they do operate differently. So we kind of have to like treat them differently. Can you speak a little
Yeah,
bit about the difference between boys and girls and like how boys kind of like socialize?
yeah. So I mean, I would say that um you know, biologically, there's not a huge difference between boys and girls in the ways that we think of as like boys, are biologically destined to like trucks and manly things. Like it's not biology, it really is socialization. And yes, socialization really drives boys and girls apart because girls and boys are socialized so differently in terms of like the emotions that they can have, the type of communication that is acceptable. So with boys, um, from a very young age, they're socialized to, to suppress any kind of feminine emotion like fear and sadness. Like those are not okay to show as boys. As we know, it's like you got to be stoic, you've got to be tough. And in addition to that, any kind of uh, like intimacy with other boys, especially like in friendships, it becomes very not okay to be touchy, to be to be hugging. Like starting in preschool, researchers have found that boys will start out preschool and be very affectionate with their friends and hug them and, tussle their hair and stuff. And then throughout the school year, they start to get more and more like distanced and less affectionate because again, that's not considered like masculine and stoic. And then there's just like a lack of vulnerability. Boys think like I can't be vulnerable with my friends. I can't show them that I have feelings. I can't talk about things that make me seem vulnerable. And and this is something I see with the teen boys that I know in my life, including my own, which is like when they're together, they don't talk about their lives. They don't talk about their feelings. They talk about sports. They talk about jokes. They talk about, TikTok videos. And it's like, and my son will say to me, and he's like, he's incredulous almost. I'm like, don't you want to talk about like what you're going through? And we just, my partner and I just went through a separation. And I'm like, my son's going through big changes. Like, don't you want to talk about any of this? And he's like, no. And he's so incredulous. He's like, why would I do that? Like that. He's like, I don't want that. Like, I don't want to talk to my friends about that. That would be weird. And like, I don't need that. And he's very much like, I do not need to ever talk about feelings, mom. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, wow. So,
That's
so
how do
they
you
are
cope? And as a woman,
right.
you're like, "But what do you mean? How do you feel things and you don't share them? Like, how can you possibly hold that all in?"
I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know. Um, but I'm scared. Like
Yeah.
I'm like, this is how boys though end up being lonely and isolated in adulthood because they don't have deep friendships and they just don't know how to connect, authentically and deeply with their friends, with their male friends. Often they will do this with a woman, a partner, and she becomes like the emotional dump. That's another topic for
That's a whole, yeah,
another
but that's exactly the problem with like our generation who now that's your pure role, like, of to be that person for your partner. And then obviously relationships like suffer. Because I see it with a lot of my single friends and I endured that when I was single too. And it's just like it's so much pressure too.
time.
Or even in
Yeah.
relationships. It's just so much pressure to be the sole provider of any sort of like, you know, um, how do you call it? Like support for like, you know? Um, and I think that obviously now when we look at the rates of like, like suicide rates with boys versus girls and like the numbers of like boys getting into like, getting into college versus girls, like boys are really, really struggling. There was a really good book. I don't know if you read Boy Mom by Ruth
Yeah.
Whitman that like
Loved it.
talks a
Still
lot
have.
about it too. I love her. She's great. And it was really like, it was eye opening. What did you find in your research? Were there any tricks or way that we can talk to boys to kind of like help like with this, them become more open?
Yeah. Yeah. So, from a young age, parents tend to not soothe their baby boys, including, babies like infants. Um, and actually, boys tend to cry more than girls, but parents think, oh, I don't need to soothe them. I don't need to like comfort them. I don't need to engage with them when they're having these feelings, and so they don't. So we should start by not doing that.
Yeah.
By
No.
really, if if we're finding that we are just less likely to be there and support and be affectionate with our sons, like that is where we can check ourselves and say, okay, it's important to be just as affectionate and have the same kinds of conversations about feelings with our boys as our girls, because that's the other thing is that parents have many more conversations about feelings in general with girls than they do with boys. They just like avoid the topic because they think, oh, boys don't have feelings, or I don't know what they think, um but we really should be treating boys and girls the same in that way, and giving boys opportunities from a young age to have feelings, to talk about feelings, not telling them like, you know, you've got to be tougher than this. I remember going to water park, and and there were boys who were so scared to go down some of the really scary rides, and the dads were so mean to them, and they were like, this is not what boys do, you've got to toughen up. And I was just like, oh God, like, let this boy be scared. This is terrifying. Like, I'm not going on this ride.
Yeah.
This is legit terrifying, and it is okay for him to have this feeling. So, don't like tell your boys they can't have feelings of fear and sadness. Um, and yeah, be affectionate, like sit, like hug your boys, like sit with them on the couch. I mean, obviously, if they want to be hugged, if they are like, no, mom, please give me space, that's one thing. But like, if
Unless you're a
they're
Latin
open,
mom and then you force them into it. And what do you mean you don't want to hug me and kiss me? This is
right,
what we do.
yeah, yeah, right, yeah, culture matters. Um, yeah, and then as they get older too, just like give them opportunities to be vulnerable with you. Like make it feel like you're a safe space for your sons to come to you and talk about feelings. If you're a dad, it helps to really talk about feelings with your boys, like to break the masculinity norm yourself and like open up and say, you know what, I've had a really rough day. I feel really sad about something that happened at work. Like if dads say that to their sons, like that is so powerful because it shows them like it is okay as a man to have feelings, to talk about them. So, breaking that cycle is very, very powerful as well.
I'm starting to have friends now that have older kids and kind of like what you were talking a little bit with your daughter. It's like there's starting to be more drama. And
Mm.
the other day, one of my friends was telling me her daughter was like, I think he was like 11, and like some of the girls were being mean, and her daughter was telling her. And it's just I would find it very hard to navigate because I wouldn't know how much I should meddle and how much I shouldn't meddle. Like what does the research show? How much should you even get involved? Should you not get involved at all? What should you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I don't think there's like a one size fits all answer to that.
Yeah.
But I've certainly encountered this with my tween daughter. And, um, often I find that listening, starting out by just really being curious and listening is very, very helpful. Like as parents, we often want to fix the problem. We want to understand like what's going on and then jump in and be like, okay, well, I think you should say this to your friend, or I think that maybe this is what's going on and here's what you should do. But it can be really helpful to like try to hold that impulse and ask curious questions like, okay, so tell me more, like what's going on? What's happened? And when you really like hold that silence and like let your kid talk and feel free to talk without being, without jumping down their throat or having an idea or trying to solve the problem, then they tend to tell you more. Um, and then often I find that there's like scaffolding you can do where you're not jumping in and meddling, but you can be like, gosh, that sounds really hard. That sounds really tricky. How did you feel when this was going on? Like ask the questions and then say like, so what do you think you could do here? What, do you want to talk about like what to do, or do you just want to vent? Like that's another great question. It's like ask them, do you want to problem solve this with me, or do you want to just have this be a venting session? And depending on what they say, if they do want to problem solve, you can really, ask them to brainstorm first. Like, well, what do you think? What are some options? Like, what are some things that you could do next that you and then like help them think through like, well, what would happen if you did do that? And sometimes I find they get there themselves. Like they will have an idea, sometimes it's not, and then they're like, oh, maybe if I did that though, I think maybe the other friend would be mad and like then that would end up causing this other thing. And maybe I could do this instead. And like they often will kind of get there. And you're kind of like coaxing them, like by
Yeah.
asking
You're like
questions that they
walking them through it.
yeah, but like not like in an overbearing way, in a like very like, you know,
Yeah.
um
No, but it
good
makes sense,
questions. Yeah.
especially if they have like a toxic friendship or something like that too. I feel like that would be like such great advice because it's just hard, 'cause especially as a parent, right? You really want to protect them. So if someone is being mean to your kid, like you wanna tell them to fuck. I would wanna tell them I mean, you know what I mean? So I'm like, "What do
Yeah.
you mean? I'm gonna talk to that kid. I'm gonna go to school." And they when they get older, you really cannot do that. Um, so
Yeah, I
it seems
know.
like a great way to, like, you know what I mean? Kind of like have them come to that realization on their own.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I had a situation with my daughter where she had a friendship where I was like, this is not a good friendship. My daughter's not being treated well. And I wanted to be like the mama bear that's like, we are shutting this down. But I was like, I also know, and I have interviewed Eileen Kennedy Moore. She's a psychologist who really specializes in kids' friendships, and she and other people have said to me, here's the thing though, like kids can get things out of friendships that we can't see, And we see the like, oh, she's being mean. She's, this, that, the other, but we don't see everything. And so in that situation, I was like asking my daughter, so tell me why you are friends with this friend, and what do you get out of this friendship? Like, what do you enjoy about your friend? And I learned all this stuff that I didn't know. And then we did talk about, well, what do you not enjoy so much about hanging out with this friend? And eventually, like through kind of again these curious questions where I'm not like trying to be judgmental, but I'm just trying to understand and help her understand. She came to a place where she's like, actually the hardest moments are when we're on the school bus together, and that's when sometimes she's really mean. And so I think I could probably ask if we could have a little space on the school bus and not sit together. And maybe that would solve things. And it like worked. And I mean, it really, really helped. And now they're in a much better place. So sometimes again, it's like you kind of get them curious about it, help them identify what are the good parts, what are the not so good parts, where do the not good parts happen, do they happen in a particular situation, can we like avoid, can we create a new context in which you engage with this person so you get the good stuff and not the bad stuff. And it was just like this, I don't know, it was a really interesting process where she kind of got to it herself again. um and she still wanted to keep the friendship, but she was like, I want to keep the good parts and get rid of the not so good parts. And I thought that was really kind of a nice compromise.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
even kind of like what you were saying, kind of like being able to stand up for herself and maybe have that conversation with her friend too, and be angry or like be upset and be able to relay this information as opposed to like shrink herself to just be able to like fit in into like a role of a group.
Right. Yes, right. So much of it is about like empowering them. Like, what could you say to her? What kind of conversation do you think could work? And yeah, yeah,
That's what I
yeah.
liked a lot about your book in general, because I feel like a lot of these books just tell you very like rigid things that you can only do in this one case. And I feel like overall, what was very gratifying as a parent to like read in your book was that like there was a lot of like things that work for many different case scenarios. So it didn't feel like a lot of homework to memorize to be like, okay, these are my scripts when this happens, which
Right.
was very a relief, to say the
Good.
least.
Good. No, that is what I found was like, even though I feel like I was digging into the details of these studies and really looking at the specifics, what I found were that there were these larger themes. Like, it's really much more about the big picture of how you engage with your kids. It's not like you don't have to get every single detail right, and there isn't a context in which the same, one conversation can work for every kid in every family in every context anyway. So it's like about like these bigger picture ideas of like coming at conversations with curiosity and listening more than you lecture, and like these broad things can be the most helpful.
I think that we're living in a very politically charged time. And I'm not going to make this conversation political, but I think that it's definitely trickling down on our kids, and like everything has become like right or left or good or bad. It's just everything has become so polarizing. How do you navigate that with like, with having conversations with children? I remember like my friend's kid the other day said something like, "Well, I can't be friends with that person because he's like he's a Trumper or something, right?" And I'm like, that is just fundamentally like, why do you even like? I understand why do you know it? Like the kid was 12, but how how do you even, you know what I mean? What do you even
Yeah.
say to that?
Yeah. 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 Oh, it is a tough time, and I do feel like it does make sense though that kids make these declarations, because this is what there's like extreme views are what go viral on TikTok,
Mhm.
like that's what's rewarded. And we even know this from research that like people actually prefer and they trust people more who have strong opinions versus like people who are much, more like, I'm not sure how I feel. And so yeah, it's rewarded everywhere. So no wonder our kids are doing this and they're seeing it everywhere.
Yeah.
Um yeah, I mean, in a situation like that, again, I think I would try to open things up and say like, "Oh, that's interesting. Like, so you don't want to be friends with them because they support Trump. Like, do you see and do they, when you're with this person, um, like, do you find like do you feel like they act differently, than what you would want a friend to act like? Sometimes it's like opening it up and saying, okay, well, so they have this political belief, but like if are they still a good person, like to, trying to
Are they a good
separate
friend?
out like right, like do you see this really affecting who they are as a friend to you, and if so, in what ways, and if not, you know how much, like it's
Yeah.
really trying to like tease everything apart. Um, yeah, I think in terms of the research on like what we can do to prevent polarization in kids, one big thing is to really, as a parent, embrace uncertainty and model like a comfort with uncertainty with our kids. And so that can be anything from like our kid asking about something that happened in the news, and instead of sort of fudging it and coming up with, well, this is what happened, even though you're not totally sure, saying something like, you know, I think I kind of know what happened, but I don't know if I know the full story. So let's research this together. Or let me look this up together because I'm not totally sure. And it's like you want to communicate to kids that it's okay to not have all the information all the time, and it's okay to not have an opinion on everything all the time. And especially this, it's okay to change your mind and to shift your opinion with more information. And so this is something that is incredibly helpful because researchers have told me who study polarization, they say, kids have come to believe that like changing your mind or being wrong about something is like a moral failing. And so, to the degree that we can help them understand that everybody is a work in progress, we're all learning. And because of that, we can all change our minds at any point. We can revise our thinking. And like, we just don't know everything about everything. And that's okay. And it's okay to admit that. Like,
Yeah.
those kinds of those kinds of modeling approaches can be incredibly helpful for kids to like feel like, oh, it's actually okay if I don't have a strong opinion about this, or if I decide to change my mind, or if I just don't have the answer.
Adults too. That would be great if a lot of adults could like learn
Yeah,
that. I feel like that's a really good lesson in life in general, especially with like
it
cancel
is.
culture and everything. It just becomes such a toxic society where like if you change your mind from 5 years ago, I'm like, I hope I change my mind. I hope in 5 years I'm like so much wiser that I think completely different.
Right? Yeah, there's a
Um,
beauty in that.
yeah. Another concept that I thought was fascinating was this idea that you talk about in the book, was this idea of essence, essentialist thinking. Am I saying it? Essentialist
Existentialist.
think. No, essentialist thinking.
Oh,
My
essentialist
ESL.
thinking. Yes, that
Yes.
rings more of a bell. I
Sorry.
was like, oh, I
Very
don't know
ESL.
that.
I'm like essentialist thinking with kids.
Yes. Yes. So essentialist thinking is, I mean, it's something we all do to some degree. It's like when we group together things that are somewhat similar in one way and we think that they are the same in every way. So it's like saying like all p- all people with brown hair are impulsive, or but we do it more in terms of like religion and race and gender, like, you know, all girls like to dance and all boys like to play soccer, whatever, like
Yeah.
sports. We group these social categories, or we talk about social categories in ways that imply that everybody in that category shares all sorts of different characteristics, when maybe they don't. And so the research suggests that when we are referring to groups of people, we should do it very carefully. So we, ideally shouldn't make these claims of like boys are, you know, boys are always hyper. Like I remember my son at camp one day, the counselor said to me in front of him, like, boys are so hard to control, or, and that is like grouping all boys into this category of like all boys share this essential nature, they are hard to control.
Yeah.
And that makes kids think, oh, well, if boys are the same, boys have that in common, they probably have other things in common, and they're very different from girls. They start to like also distinguish like, well, boys then must be totally different in so many ways from girls, and then it kind of creates this rift between groups, and it starts to lead to, you know discrimination and stereotyping and all sorts of things. So um we should be specific if we're saying like this particular person is a great dancer rather than all black people are great dancers. So we just really should be careful about like how we're referring to social groups, and try not to sort of group people together based on a particular characteristic they have, because that just leads kids to think that this is like how we should be doing. We should be lumping people together, and in ways that are going to be problematic in the long run.
Yeah. Money. I feel like it I almost like feels like a dirty topic. I grew up in a way where it was very much you don't talk about money. It's gosh, no one talks about money. But it just seems that especially with social media now more than ever, it's impossible to live that way. Do you think it's good to talk about money? When should you talk about money? What does
Yeah,
the research say?
it is very good to talk about money and, and not just money, but like all the things that go along with it, like debt and investing and, and interest, like all of these details related to managing money. I think we think of as like too adult, like, oh, kids don't need to understand or they won't understand it, like it's too complicated. But I went to a school where second graders were getting lessons on financial literacy,
Oh,
and these kids were I mean, they started asking questions about interest at one point, and I was like, wow, and the woman who was running this is what she does. She works for a local credit union, and she goes around to second grade classrooms, and she's like, "Oh yeah, like you have no idea. Like second graders can really understand complex financial concepts, and they really want to because they understand that money is like, unfortunately, a lot of what makes the world go round. They know it's important. They want to understand it, but parents tend to not talk about money. And we do it in part because we have probably a lot of shame around money. Like if we have any debt, we think, oh, debt is the worst thing ever. And like, I'm ashamed because I have credit card debt, whatever it is. And so we don't want to talk about our own finances or money in general with our kids, when actually it can be very, very helpful to do that. And especially like, um, helping kids understand the financial decisions we're making on a day-to-day basis can be useful. Like when you're at the grocery store saying, I'm going to buy these paper towels instead of these because these ones are half off. And that, let me explain what that means. And really like bringing our kids along on our like financial decision journeys can be incredibly helpful and really make a difference in terms of like their comfort with money, their willingness to talk about it and ask for help from professionals when they get older. It like leads to all sorts of better financial habits when kids have these conversations early.
and what do you say, for example, there's a big homeless problem here in LA, and I haven't really like tried to explain that to my kid. But like whenever you see like these people on the street that clearly are like struggling and having a hard time, should you bringing that up? Should you be trying to just avoid it or what?
Yeah. I mean, I am a big fan of using whatever I'm encountering in the world with my kids as an opportunity for a conversation about that issue, like if it's a social issue. The problem is that as parents, we often don't know how to say things, right? It's like, well, how do I talk about this in a way that's like accurate and, fair and complete? We're just worried we're going to get the language wrong or
Yeah.
leave out things that are important. But again, to back to this whole thing about like embracing uncertainty, I think what we can do is to start a conversation. And, if your child notices something, points out like, why is that person sleeping on the street? Then you can start the conversation and start to explain like what does it mean if you're unhoused um and how does it happen, and you can also say, look, this is an issue that I feel like I could understand a little better. I don't fully understand like why it's such a problem here, and like what are the reasons for it. Let's do some research together, and like when you get home then you can say like, I want to talk more about this because this is important, and I feel like you're old enough to understand, like let's do some research online. And so you don't have to have all the answers, you just have to show your child that like you're willing to talk to them about it, you're willing to learn more, and like, hey, this is an issue that like is important, and I think I want you to understand it. I want you to learn more about it, and you're old enough to learn at least, something about it.
But yeah,
But we
especially when
really
it
have.
comes to inequality, it's just so hard because we're trying to teach them if you work hard enough and you do everything right, and like, this is kind of like everything is gonna go right.
Mhm.
And obviously there's a sense of the unknown. So it's hard to kind of like put two and two together and be like, yeah, I'm telling you this, but at the same time, we don't know. Um, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I know that is one of the problems with like growth mindset and like praising for effort. There sometimes it can lead to the conclusion that like if you are struggling, if you don't have much money, if you are in a bad situation, then that must be because you didn't work hard enough for, you didn't
Yeah.
try hard enough and it's your fault. And so you really need to also talk about all the structural reasons for, different social problems. And so that because kids will, and in fact, adults do this too. There's research on this that um, we tend to assume that there's like an internal cause for a person's situation. Like it's because,
Mhm.
it's because of what they've done or who they are. And there's some, failing, or
100%.
if they're successful, it's because they are like they worked hard and they made it happen. And we don't talk about all of the very important structural reasons for success and inequality and all, and things like that. And we really need to do that with kids. And that's true of racism too, by the way, because if we don't, kids notice that people of different races have different amounts of power and wealth in society. And if we don't explain that this is because of racism, then
Mhm.
they will start to think, well, maybe white people are just better and smarter. And also men, maybe men are just better and smarter than women because they see that more men have positions of power. So like we have to talk about those structural issues as well.
Context, give context.
Yeah.
Um, Important. I know we're running out of time, so I have a couple more questions. Technology. I read The Anxious Generation no long ago, and I nearly had a panic attack. I probably did. Um, my husband probably thought he wanted to like put me somewhere because I was like, "What? Like, if technology is inherently bad, and I'm damaging my kid by living in this world, but there's no way we can live without it, then how are my kids gonna live in a world without technology? And what am I doing to them? Like, am I supposed to move to like, the Peruvian jungle and like just hide them away from everything? And like, that's just not realistic.
No, no, that's the thing. Technology is here to stay, right? So like yeah, ideally then, instead of like trying to figure out a way to keep our kids away from it forever, which is impossible, we can't do that.
Yeah.
What we should be thinking about is like, how can we help them develop a healthy relationship with them? How can we instill in them the skills that they will need to be able to manage technology throughout their lives? So it's much it's much more of like preparation rather than protection. I'm not that I'm against like screen rules and limits and things like that at all, but I think like overall, again, it's like when we think about what our role is as parents and what we want for our kids, it's like I want them to learn slowly, hopefully, like
Yeah.
what they will need to know to be able to deal with this tool in their life, right? Instead of trying to protect them from it and not let them learn any skills until they're 18 or whatever it is, and then throw them in the abyss with with all the technology. Um, yeah. So I mean, I
You're pro
also
screens. I'm not ruining my kid by like, do you think
well,
we should be banning screens completely? Like, what do you think we should be doing in terms of like technology as far as like what the research shows of like what's best for our kids?
I tend to focus more on like parental strategies in terms of like
Yeah.
what policies should we have? I don't know.
No,
Um,
not policies, but I mean like policies at home. That's what I
yeah,
mean
yeah,
more.
yeah. Okay, okay. Also, I have to warn you. I just got a text from my son, and I'm wondering, can I like scroll out of? Can I like open my text messages to see what it is before will
Oh
it
my God.
like end this?
Wait,
Because I'm like,
maybe. I have no idea. I never
I mean,
done
it's
this.
kind of perfect that we're doing this like parenting live. And then, of course, I'm like, my kid texts me and I'm like, oh, what? I think he's trying to figure out if he needs to go home on the bus or not. But I don't want
Maybe?
to mess this up. Okay, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna just swipe up and see what happens. Am I still here?
Yeah,
Do
you're
you see
still there.
me?
Yep,
Okay. All right. Hold on.
you're good.
Um, okay, I just have to say yes because he asked me something.
No
This is
worries.
so funny. Okay, I'm coming back. All right, now I'm back.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No worries.
Um,
Where do you agree with like, the Anxious Generation book and where do you think it's a little bit more nuanced?
Okay, okay. So I agree with a lot of what's in the anxious generation in terms of especially all the points he makes about like it's so important to give kids independence and to let them take risks and to build resilience in these ways, like let them play. Like he makes a lot of really wonderful points there. I also agree that we need to set limits and think about how are we going to help our kids engage with technology in a healthy way because we do know that there are harms that can come from technology overuse or exposure to certain types of content. Like there's no question that technology can do harm. um, what I take issue with, and it's really like a nuanced point that I make in my book, but it's the way that Haidt characterizes the scientific consensus on the effects of technology and social media on teenagers. And he really makes some sweeping claims about basically saying that we know that social media and technology and phones are the key reason for the devastating rates of depression and anxiety in teens, and that we know that social media is almost always harmful. And if you look at the research, and I looked very carefully at all of the research, it's very hard to interpret. It's very messy. We need better and more research, but it really does not point to this uniform like claim that he makes in his book. And I worry. I really value scientific nuance and integrity, and I think scientific communicators, we should be honest, and we should be communicating the science, in a way that reflects what it truly says. And I do not feel that he did that. Um, but again, this, in terms of implications, I still think we need to be very thoughtful about how we help our kids navigate technology. And I can talk about like some of the overarching strategies that the
Mhm.
research suggests are helpful. It's just that I just worry that he is misrepresenting the science in a way that I find is going to worsen parental anxiety and really lead to a lot of panic that is not justified. And we know that this panic is not helpful. When parents are terrified and when parents think screens are just awful and dangerous no matter what, then we also like engage with our kids in ways that actually that can cause more conflict in the home and undermine the parent child relationship in ways that are actually worse than the effect of technology on the parent child relationship. There's some interesting research there. So like the guilt and the panic we feel, it does not help us be better parents, and it does not help our kids. It just makes us more anxious and can put a strain on our relationship with our kids.
What would you say are the top three kind of like overarching strategies that you have found that are helpful through like, kind of like the many different issues that we're encountering in today's world? Because you've been
Oh,
saying that
so
there's like, there's some of them that keep repeating themselves that are just like,
oh,
kind of like,
yeah.
what would you
Yeah, yeah,
think those
yeah.
are?
Okay, got it. Um, so one big one is really listening with curiosity to your kids and engaging with them respectfully on whatever issue it is. So, when kids have opinions and they have opinions, to really let them voice their opinion and try to understand it before we start like jumping in with our ideas and our solutions. And this is true of technology, by the way. If we want to set a new limit with our kid, it helps to sit down and have a conversation where, we have the opportunity to say, here's why I'm concerned about TikTok and I want to put a time limit on it. But we
Yeah.
also listen to them, and they might say, but, um, here's why it's really important to me to have 2 hours of TikTok. At least like let them say their piece and listen and respect what they have to say, because when you do that, kids really sense like I'm being heard. I have some agency here. My parents are listening to me. They're negotiating with me. And that makes them more interested in listening to us and following our rules. So really giving kids that respect in every domain. But I just mentioned
Yeah.
technology because we were just talking about it. Really helps kids, just strengthens your relationship, makes them more willing to work with you. Um, let's see. Another big one I've said is preparing more than you're protecting. So really thinking about, instead of trying to, keep our kids from being exposed to certain things or learning about certain things, or doing things that involve a little bit of risk, like think about how we can instead have the conversations in an age appropriate way and maybe let them take a few risks that feel comfortable and to us, in ways that will kind of push them outside their comfort zone, which will help build resilience and problem solving skills, and also help them understand the world around them, through the types of conversations we're having. uh let's see. The third one I would say, which we also kind of touched upon, is just like letting kids have their feelings, whatever those feelings are, you know, validate and accept their feelings for what they are. And you can do this in a way where you're accepting a child's feelings, but also setting limits on their behavior. This isn't to say that like you allow your kid to throw books across the room when they're angry, but you can say, I see you see that you're angry. Not that that's ever happened in my house at all.
No,
Um,
never, never. That would never happen.
Never, never. But it's like, okay, you're angry. I understand you're angry, and that I see this, and you can be as angry as you need to be, but like, here's the limits on what you can do. But really, just like letting kids have their feelings, letting boys please have their feelings of sadness and fear, and having girls feel angry, like supporting that, allowing that. that is very helpful in terms of building emotional literacy. Like the more kids feel that they can just have their feelings instead of trying to suppress them, the more they learn about the emotional landscape and the better they develop empathy skills. And the more that they experience frustration and discomfort and sadness too, the more practice they have developing coping skills. And those coping skills over time are going to be what builds emotional resilience.
I have one last question for you.
Okay.
I feel like we
Okay.
kind of touched upon this in the beginning. And in times when the world feels so heavy and so dark and so overwhelming, how do you remind yourself that what you're doing matters and how you're parenting your kid matters?
Yeah. I really believe that parenting is a form of activism because we are raising the next generation of humans, and the next generation of humans is going to determine what happens in our world. And so this is like why I do what I do, because I start out like whenever I feel panicked and whenever I feel out of control, I turn to research and I'm like, can research get me through this? Can research tell me that like I should have less fear and more hope? And almost always the answer is yes. And what I learned through all of this research is that the things we do as parents really do make a difference in terms of who our children become. And, are they going to be truly compassionate, empathetic people? Are they going to be people who can weather the different storms of that life throws at them? Are they going to be people who can build and maintain friendships and relationships and be able to be like emotionally intimate? All of these things, all of these skills are skills that we as parents can help nurture in our kids. And they're incredibly important skills when we think about like how the world works. And, it's like we have a lot of power to shape who our kids are going to become and what they're going to do in the world. And collectively, if we all are working to build these skills, then we are going to make the world a better place through our parenting. So if you can't go to protests because you don't have the time, or if you can't do all the things that you think you should be doing as a good citizen, just remember that like by raising children to be good human beings, you are engaging in a very important form of activism.
Thank you. This was amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. Hello, Poor World. Get it. You need it. Please, everyone should get it. It's an amazing book.
Thank
Again,
you.
even like the fact that you had like the notes and like the summaries at the end of every chapter. So you could just get like some bullet points of like the things that you actually need to know and stuff. It's brilliant. Thank you for taking the time. It means so much. Cheers to raising wonderful humans that are going to change the world.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Victoria.
Lila. Thank you.
This
Thank
was
you. Thank you.
amazing.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.